It's great for you to join us this afternoon. The city legal community exists to consider the bigger questions of life with suits and city workers in cities right around Australia by looking at the Bible together. If you're new to Parramatta City Legal, a special welcome. The format is really simple. It's a talk followed by an opportunity for some questions and answers. In terms of questions, you can ask them by writing them on a piece of paper in front of you and handing them to myself, using the Slido application if you're online, or texting them to the number on your handout. And if you're in person, you can ask them simply by shouting them out, which is great. You can also give your feedback by scanning the QR code on the back of the handout or online, and that's a really good way of keeping in touch with City Legal and Parramatta City Legal as to what's coming up. We're very privileged to have our third out of 4 talks with Dr. Peter Jensen. So I'm going to invite Peter up. We've got one mic between us. Well, here we go.
There is a second mic.
Yep.
A little bit intimate.
Do you want to swap now?
No. It's like an ice cream, sharing an ice cream together.
But who gets the cone?
We never used to think about it at all.
So two questions sort of around today's topic. How many ancient languages can you translate?
Thank you. Well, my experience of languages to start with is very, very poor. I started with Latin at school and quickly gave that up. I was doing French until the French teacher, who was a Frenchman, and I don't know, he must have sinned grievously because he was condemned to teaching French to Australian schoolboys in the 1950s. Can you imagine a worse fate? His beloved language mangled. Anyhow, one day he said, "Jensen, stand up." I can't do a French accent. "Stand up." "Yes, Monsieur Wilkie." He said, "You will never speak French." It was a sort of so I never tried after that. So that went down because it was 2. At college, I tried to learn German after I left college to go to university and Oxford, and never made anything with that. At college, I did 1 Hebrew exam successfully, thank goodness. Otherwise, I wouldn't have got honours. I did it only because they changed the exam and made it easier that year without warning. I looked up from the paper. I looked across the room where my brother Philip was. We looked at each other, smiled, and got to work on the paper. It was terrific. And I can manage to translate Greek if it's the New Testament.
Okay.
Favorite? All languages are not my thing.
Okay.
Except the English thing. I like English.
English is good.
Yeah.
We'll take English. Favorite word from the ancient languages that you have either studied or...
Oh, I see. Read? Yes, thank you for that. I was going to say Peter, but no, Petros, but I'll say Charis instead, grace.
Beautiful. You've asked us to read Genesis 11, which
yes,
I'm going to do, and then I'll hand over to yourself. So we're going to read Genesis 11, Genesis 11, not 1, verses 1 to 9. Beautiful. The whole earth had the same language and vocabulary. As people migrated from the east, they found a valley in the land of Shinar and settled there. They said to each other, "Come, let's make oven-fired bricks." They used brick for stone and asphalt for mortar. And they said, "Come, let's build ourselves a city and a tower with its top in the sky. Let's make a name for ourselves, otherwise we'll be scattered throughout the earth." Then the Lord came down to look over the city and the tower that the humans were building. The Lord said, "If they have begun to do this as one people, all having the same language, then nothing they plan to do will be impossible for them. Come, let's go down there and confuse their language so that they will not understand one another's speech." So from there, the Lord scattered them throughout the earth, and they stopped building the city. Therefore, it is called Babylon, for there the Lord confused the language of the whole earth, and from there the Lord scattered them throughout the earth.
Babylon. Why Babylon?
Why Babylon? I don't. You're speaking, not me. They do lots of things. I assume you're probably referring to babbling on.
Yeah, Babylon. I mean, what does the foreign language sound like?
Gibberish.
Yeah. It's not an accent. The name is Babylon. Thank you. I just thought I'd interrogate you. I love interrogating people. That's what my skill is. I'm so sorry I never was a barrister. Anyhow, never mind. I couldn't pass the exams and failed first year twice in law. I may have mentioned that to you before, but I worked for a solicitor called Rosenblum. He was a wonderful man, but he couldn't. He used to call me, he had a nickname for me, the Undertaker. He said, "Come on, show me what's on your desk. What have you buried now?" Undertaker. He was a great guy. He said, "Peter, the biggest thing about being in the law is never advise your clients to go to court." He said, never, never, never. Let them lose rather than go to court. Well, there we are. It's a good thing to have taught. Thank you very much. We're doing the family history of Abraham. We started with Genesis 12, actually, Abraham himself, and we're looking back now because it's the family history of Abraham, but it's our family history as well. And last week, we saw the mighty creator, God, the one God, and that pushes aside all the gods and means that we are dealing with one God, one will in all the world. And that makes a fantastic difference to the way in which people view this world and get on in this world. It's extraordinary, the difference that makes to the ordinary way people think. Now, are we basically, let's think for a moment. This is a rhetorical question. Okay. Are we basically good or basically bad? A very, very well-known politician here in Australia once said this. I'm not quoting him because I did quote him once in a public place, and I got to understand he did not like me quoting him and saying he was wrong. So here's what he said, and you may like to take it in. You can't tell from which side of politics he is, rightly, because he represents not so much Labor or Liberal. He represents what you may call the progressives, I suppose, is what we call them these days, or more liberal-minded, if you like, liberal philosophy. He says the old regime of telling people how to run their lives, either by churchmen or the government, is running out of time. Australians want to be free. Interesting definition of freedom. They want to have independence. They want to have choice. Is that how you define freedom? Choice. Now, there are some people who distrust human nature and believe that people won't make the right decisions and that others should make those decisions for them. We err on the side of respecting individual judgment and respecting individual choices. Well, it's a serious statement, and it was meant seriously, and it came as close as any of our politicians do to being philosophical. Is it right? Can we trust? Can we trust human nature? Now, insofar as you are a lawyer, you would know the answer to that immediately because your whole business is built upon the fact that you can't trust human nature. What is the point of view if that is not the case? My son, I was just sharing, my son, who's a lawyer in a country town. I said to him, "How are you getting on during the pandemic, mate? Business dropped off?" He said, "Dad, we've never done better." He said, "People are coming in all the time with their fights and squabbles." And he said, he was smiling. He said, "It was terrific." He meant business was good, but what it represented was terrible. And I believe that what he told me is not unknown for others as well. So is our politician correct? Human nature is basically good and can be trusted. Or are you on the side of Pascal, the great French philosopher, mathematician from the 18th century, whose books are still worth reading, the Pensées of Pascal, the thoughts of Pascal, wonderful. And he said, speaking of human beings, We are the glory and the scum of the universe. Not bad, is it? Deeply Christian, I would say, and perhaps better than anyhow. Okay, now that's the point of 3 passages that I want to briefly visit now. Not just the passage we read, come back to that in the end, but 3 passages. First of all, I'm going back to something I call original, then to profound, and then to pride. Okay, and first of all to original. Because we go back for that into Genesis chapter 3. Now, Genesis 3, of course, is built on 1 and 2, the creation of the whole universe. It's built on the creation of human beings in the image of God. It's built upon a covenantal relationship, really, between God and Adam in the first place, even before Eve comes on the scene, where God tells him, here's the Garden of Eden, keep it. You know, you were supposed to work in it, but you may take of the fruit of the tree of life, by which I mean, I think he wasn't immortal, only God is immortal, but by taking of this fruit, I think it's saying, but you won't die because you'll be taking this fruit. And, but don't take of the fruit of the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. So there was freedom with boundary, which is necessary for freedom. Freedom only exists when there are boundaries. Otherwise, it's chaos. So Adam is in the garden, then Eve, and the 2 of them are living in a covenant relationship with God, in which God has told them certain things, spoken to them, promised, and they have entered into this covenant of obedience with God. They are free, with true freedom, free to be human. You see, freedom is really a freedom to be the person you were designed to be, not just free to do anything you wish. You're not free to travel to the moon just by thinking. I always use the most silly of all sort of illustrations of this, but normally I'm speaking to young people, so I'll tell you how silly it is. But when I was but a child, we used to have an old series of books called Little Golden Books. These were children's books. No, you can't say that you know them. That's not possible. It was a long time ago. And one of them was called Tootle, and it was all about a train that left the tracks. And Tootle doesn't like being on the tracks, leaves the tracks and goes off across. For heaven's sake, man, you can't be that old. Goes across the meadows. Now, it has a lovely time, etc., etc., etc. Now, you and I know that that's absolute nonsense, that no train leaves the tracks and goes off across the meadows. It's a disaster. But it's an illustration of the politician's view of freedom. You can make choices, any choice you like. The individual makes good choices for the individual and does the individual's thing. No, freedom for that train is to go along the tracks because it's a train. And freedom for us is to be human as we're designed to be. That's true freedom. If we go off and away from that, we don't become free, we become slaves. Or so the Bible tells us, and so experience tells us as well. If there's one group of people that don't need to be persuaded about original sin, it's you. I said that this morning, actually, and quick as a flash, Ian Davidson, who's a SC in town, I think, said, and you too. The ministry is just as much built on sin as the legal profession. Thank you, Ian. So they were set up as free. Then Genesis 3 comes along, Adam and Eve in the garden, and the serpent, more crafty than any creature that God has made, approaches the woman and tests on the word of God, right? Did God actually say, he says, testing her? And she answers, yes, he did. In fact, she goes a little further than what we're told. She said, you're not even supposed to touch them, lest you die. So she knows. And then the serpent takes the next stage and says, he queries God's goodwill in making that law. He says, you know why God's made that good law? He doesn't have your best interests in heart. God knows that when you eat it, your eyes will be opened. Yes. And you will be like God, knowing good and evil. Now, knowing good and evil there is a phrase, it's a universal type phrase. It means In the end, it means making your own judgments as to what is good and what is wrong. In biblical terms, good and evil is defined by God. The knowledge of good and evil is the determination of human beings to say, no, 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 no. I will say what's good. I will say what's wrong. And that was the temptation in the garden, to be like God, to stride the earth, determining what's good and wrong, what's good and bad, the knowledge of good and evil. Okay, making your own decisions about right and wrong. The temptation strikes Eve in the heart first, doesn't it? She feels the possibility of knowing good and evil. She looks at the fruit. She sees that it's good to eat. She takes it and she gives it to Adam. Eve sins first, but Adam sins worst, because Adam was the one in the garden who originally got the word. And so in the New Testament, we're not told that we are in Eve, though that's true, but we're in Adam, because Adam is the head of the race, so to speak. At that point, is what you call the federal or covenantal head of the race, who's received the command in the first place. And he has now done exactly what he should not have done. It is the fall of Adam and Eve, but we are told that we are in Adam. It's a corporate sin, as all sin is in the end, because sin touches and corrupts human relationships virtually inevitably. They committed it, but because they were Adam and Eve, they not only committed it themselves, they committed their descendants to it as well, because they were, as the captain of the team commits the team, so they, the head of the race, committed their team to this. They thought all their children would benefit from this, and so they passed it on. And in actual fact, what they managed to pass on was misery. People sometimes say that the fact of evil in the world tells against the Christian religion being true, whereas the fact of evil in the world is what the Christian religion is all about, if you follow me. We even managed to crucify the Son of God when he came. Not a good look. So they committed their descendants to misery, to bad relationships with each other, to pain, the pain of work, the pain of childbirth, and expulsion. Indeed, the New Testament says that we are the enemies of God. So the corruption of relationships is first and foremost the corruption of your relationship with God himself. Well, that was, if you like, the original sin. One of the interesting things about the Bible is how people have funny ideas, don't we? We always look back and say there was a golden age when things were going really, really well, you know. For me, it was the 1950s, which everyone else believes was awful, but I think it was wonderful. But, you know, there's always a golden age. And you look back and you say, well, there was the golden age of the church, for example. Well, there was no such golden age, thank God. But in the New Testament, which had the temptation of saying, wow, this church founded by Jesus Christ, it was wonderful from the very beginning. If you know the story of Ananias and Sapphira, and then all the other stories as they go through the Acts of the Apostles and the epistles, think of the Corinthian church. It was a disaster zone. No. And so it is if you go back through all the heroes of the Bible, the great ones, all marred by sin, all the children of Adam and Eve, all corrupted. In the end, all the enemies of God. So I move to the next point, the profundity of sin. Now we turn to, the story moves on, and we'd have to look at the story because the story pursues the line of course, they're expelled from the Garden of Eden, have two sons, and one murders the other. I mean, yeah, that's the life. And Cain goes off, and Cain's children and Cain's descendants are absolutely the murky people you've ever met. That's in chapter 4. But God is at work still through the next line. Adam and Eve have another child, and his name is Seth. And Seth's line is a godly line, ending with a man called Noah. And that's at the end of chapter 5. Then chapter 6 begins, and the situation now is described in terms of nothing less than disaster. And in the end, verse 5, in one of the most telling verses in the Bible about human condition, I don't think our politician friend would agree with this one. The Lord saw that the wickedness of man was great upon the earth. Hey, do you remember that saying that was so popular a few years ago? I don't know if it still is. You're not a bad boy, but you've done a bad thing. You don't want to make a boy feel as though he's bad or something like this. Well, listen to this. The Lord saw the wickedness of man was great upon the earth, and that every intention of the thoughts of his heart was only evil continually. I don't think you could have used another word in there to indicate the depravity of this. Now, that may have been addressed to the people on earth at that time, but it may be that it's, you could say, well, not everyone's like that these days. Well, that may be true. However, the point is that the wickedness of human beings is described not in terms so much of their actions, their activities, but their heart. What's going on within them? And if you're going to ask yourself, what does human sin look like? Well, it doesn't so much consist of what people do or fail to do. Yes, that of course, but that begins with decisions and insights, emotions, aspirations. It begins with the spontaneous wishes. Indeed, even though there's a word for this, concupiscence, actually, believe it or not, which is not just a sex word. It's the word for, in the New Testament, epithumia in Greek, since I was asked. Epithumia is desire, evil desire. Now, you have desires. You don't say to yourself, oh, I'm going to have a desire. The desire comes from within. And evil desires are evil to start with. They come out of the cesspool already. And that's how the New Testament, that's how Jesus, that's how this sees us, that sin comes from within. And the heart is desperately wicked, says Jeremiah 17, verse 9, or Psalm 51, I was born in sin, and in sin did my mother conceive me. The picture of the Bible and the testimony of the Bible is outrageously true. True to your experience. True to your inward experience, if you're honest. And it's true to your experience of other human beings. Greed, envy, lust, all these things are the stirrings of sin within us. We may not act on them, but the mere fact that they are there. We may not act on them because we don't want to be respectable. But we would if we could. So wickedness arises from the inner corruption, which puts the self first, which says, the knowledge of good and evil is mine. I determine what's good and evil. The trouble is, we can't. We're fooling ourselves that we can. And it is a universal problem. It is here. And so, because justice is at the heart of the universe, thank goodness. That's good, isn't it? We live in a just world. So it says, and the Lord was sorry that he'd made man on the earth, and it grieved him to his heart. And the Lord said, I will blot out man whom I've created from the face of the land. Man being used here is anthropologically of human beings. Man and animals, creeping things, birds of the heavens. I'm sorry I've made them, he said, and so the great flood. But of course, there's Noah, one person with a family. But Noah found favor in the eyes of the Lord. Now, for other reasons, we know that he found favor in the eyes of the Lord, particularly because his faith in God. He trusted God, but he certainly wasn't perfect, because no sooner does he get out of the ark and with his family, then he gets drunk, and his youngest son, there's a sexual element to this. We can't quite see it, but there's a sexual element to what his youngest son does in relation when he finds his father lying there, sozzled. So Noah is immediately described as having the sin of Adam. He's not free from it. It's not as though God has started with a new good man. That's not possible. So sin is profound and universal. Now, finally, we come to the Tower of Babel, and we see here in this third story that there's a lot more in this passage. There's a lot of stuff about peoples and that sort of thing. That's very important. But we come to the story of the Tower of Babel. And here, if anywhere, we see ourselves, I think. We see the unity of the family is described, the family that arose from the flood. They're relatively unified at this point. They want to keep their unity. They grow a city, defensive, in other words, against others. And they decide to build a tower using the technological skills of the day, which were considerable. Okay, I don't know if you could create a tower with bricks and bitumen from your knowledge, but anyhow, they did, etc., etc. And they were going to build a tower to reach the heavens as an expression of their own capacity to reach God. And then there's, I think, a joke. I think it's a joke anyhow, where God says, I'll come down and see what they're doing. I think God, of course, knows what they're doing, but I think it's so tiny, so trivial, so stupid what they're doing that he has to come down to have a look. It's so like an ant here. At any rate, I think it's intended to be a joke of some sort. But they had put their technological brilliance at the service of sin. Now, does that sound familiar? Does it sound something like the modern world? When I think, when we went to Oxford in 1976, we'd have 3 telephone calls a year, if we were lucky, lasting 3 minutes. They'd always be the same. How's the weather, dear? You'd never talk about anything serious. There's only 3 minutes. So how's the weather? And 3 phone calls, each lasting 3 minutes, very expensive, and that was it. Now I can pick up the phone anytime I like and ring anyone I like virtually. The technological revolution has been immense. If I want to know anything, I just Google it. I don't know if you get the right answer, but nonetheless, the internet is absolutely astounding. The brilliance of human beings that we could create such a thing. We are the glory of the universe. And you can tell we're the scum of the universe because of the use that's made of the internet. The way people beat each other up. The way in which lies are told readily. So my GP friend says, people keep coming in and they've consulted Dr. Google and they know everything. And they don't know everything. And worse, of course, the pornography that's readily available. We are the glory and the scum of the universe. We have skills like you wouldn't imagine, but we always pervert them. That's us. That's us in our post-fallen world. Well, are we basically good or basically evil? Well, we're certainly not basically good. There's a little bit of good in every bad boy, I guess, as my mother used to say to my little brother. But one of the key questions of the day is not theology about God, but anthropology. Who are we? Is one of the actual agitating matters of the day in the Western world particularly. Who are we? And our children don't know who they are. And our grandchildren won't have the faintest clue who they are. They have to invent who they are. One of the things that I think we ought to do as Christians is to look at all the disciplines of the university and ask, what's the anthropology on which this discipline is based? Because underneath every discipline, there's an anthropology. What do they believe about human beings? Now, I would have thought in the study of the law, the anthropology was a very Christian one. Namely, you believe in sin. I think that's what you believe as a lawyer. But that would be unusual in the subjects of the university, I would say. We ought to have an assumption based on this of human worth and dignity, but also of evil and the capacity of evil. The crisis at the moment in Macquarie Street, where people have been given a free vote on suicide, worse, assisted suicide, so you implicate someone else in your own suicide, is based on what my friend said here. Every individual has the right to make their own choices, and we will make good choices because we're good people. It's absolutely individualistic. It's not communal. It doesn't take into account the relationships involved. And to think, and you know this, you're lawyers, law is a very blunt instrument. You can't stop bad people doing bad things because you've passed laws. But because people believe we're not bad people, we're good people, and we have individual rights, in this state, unless something happens, we will soon have such a change in the medical profession and what you believe about doctors and medicine, such an open door for families to exploit, that it takes no account of human wickedness. Oh, I know it says it does, but it doesn't. It's the question of anthropology, who we are. And so, let me finish by saying, you'll be glad that I'm finishing by saying, but nonetheless, what we're reading here is good news. It explains who we are. We are the glory and scum of the universe. It removes human arrogance and it introduces the truth that we are actually helpless before God. Jesus said, whoever commits sin is a slave to sin. Great insight. And it gives us assurance that there is justice. The flood and the Tower of Babel and the expulsion from Eden all tell us that there is justice in this world. It will come. It is here, but it will come finally. And that day of judgment, that justice gives meaning to this life. And it also says every human being matters. God is not going to judge elephants, but he will judge us because we are the image bearers of God. And every human being is that important. I pause. You'll be glad to hear. Sorry, I've not left proper time for questions.
Got some brief time.
I heard that.
We'll do a couple of questions. A couple have come through. First one, free will, does it exist? How does it work?
Well, what the New Testament says is, and what human experience agrees with, is that, let me say, Romans chapter 7, for example, the good I would, I cannot, and the evil that I will not, that I do. When corruption occurred in the human being and the human heart, it corrupted the will as well. So it's better, I think, to talk about free agency. No one forces you to do it. No one forced you to do that wrong thing. You chose. You are responsible. But you don't have free will in the sense that your will is good. Human beings that are as God designed us to be, our will is good. Notice I've used good rather than free even. Our will is good. It will choose the good. But the will as we now have it chooses ill.
Second question. As a Christian parent, what might be a useful comment to make to start a discussion on original sin with a non-Christian child?
With a non-Christian child, presumably a teenage child or something like that. Start a discussion on original sin. You can think of a number of things, can't you? I think it's worth seeking from a child, this is my suggestion, instantly, just off the top of my head. I think I would engage the child in a discussion in which the child judges other people. I'd get them to express their judgment and their disdain and their disgust with other people. And then I'd say, well, what gives you the right to judge? What standard are you using to judge other people here? And do you think it's strange that you could judge everybody else? I think that, I don't know, that's my instant thought there. In other words, my impression always is it's better to get people to commit themselves first and then chop them off when they do. Don't tell my children I said that.
Before I read out another one, any questions from the floor?
Yes.
Yeah, you mentioned with the people in Babel, they built the city to defend themselves. At that point, they're all Noah's family descendants.
Yes, they are. Well, it's a bit like Cain and Abel, I think, where Cain gets a city going. And I think given that Noah has already, his son Ham is already offside, I think there's fighting already in the family. They're speaking the same language, they are united, but when God scatters them, they try to build a name for themselves, you see, and then God scatters them and they speak different languages. They don't relate that way any longer. But I think it was probably against each other. Not good. Sometimes your brother's your worst enemy. Not in my family, of course. Yeah. Certainly not, actually. Yeah.
Verse 7 implies that there are more than one. So who's the other if one is God?
Verse 7.
So it's let's or us.
Oh, let us go down.
Yeah.
Well, because the word God is a plural word. It's grammatical. Elohim is, you see, I know Hebrew, is a plural word. And so it's difficult to know, is it let me, let us? Same in Genesis chapter 1. Now, sometimes people see this as the divine court, God speaking to the angels. That's possible. Sometimes it's just a manner of speech because it's plural. Sometimes others see it as a prelude to the Trinity. And that's not so stupid after all, actually. But we don't know for sure.
Beautiful. Any more from the floor? Wrap up. Cool.
So has this confusion of language and the scattering of people actually worked against the gospel today? It seems to me that in this act of you have multiple cultural centers, multiple languages. I look at Paul, he stands up and says, there are many gods here, we speak different languages.
Yeah, thank you. Because Day of Pentecost, of course, comes into play here. Pentecost doesn't mention Babel specifically, but it's hard not to read the two things like that. And then the expansion of the gospel throughout all the world has had extraordinary impact. The Bible is the most translated book, I believe, in the world, and the missionary movement of the Christian church has been one of the most remarkable movements in all of history and continues to be, with the different cultures, with Christian missionaries being prepared to live amongst different cultures and hear them in. So yes, it's been a barrier. Yes, it's been a problem, but it's interesting to see how the Holy Spirit has overcome those problems in bringing the gospel. So there are more Christians in Africa now than in the West, and probably in China. We don't know how many Christians are in China, but people talk about 25 million, even 80 million, 100 million. We don't know, but there's a lot. So God, by his Spirit, is at work overcoming the barriers to which you refer, which are real.
30 seconds next week, final in the series.
Yes, indeed.
What can we expect?
Just as good. We turn to God the Savior next week because this is grim. This is very grim, but it's left us helpless, and that's where we need to be. And so we see that God does save, first of all, through Noah and the ark, or not just first of all, there's other intimations of his saviourhood here, and and we learn from his method of saving, which is usually to use one person to save, like Abraham and so forth and so on. So we're into God the Savior next week, just in time for Christmas.
Beautiful. Thank you. Before we wrap up, just an invite to those who have no idea about Hope groups. They're groups that meet regularly, depending on the frequency of the group. Open God's Word, ask some hard questions, bring others along in a trusted environment to sort of dig deep and be bold in those sort of questions. So if you need more information, come and chat to myself or Peter Wrench or Jeff Brown, who's I think started one last week. Otherwise, same time, same place next week for the fourth and final in this storm before Christmas. And thanks for joining us.